Vera, thank you for the introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me here.
I'll thank you after.
And thank you to the folks who helped me get a minion today. Very nice to be able to dive into my father's old school. Thank you. I'm going to talk about my father a little bit, but he was a member here, Mom was a member, and it's wonderful being here. But let's get to the subject matter, because we're a little bit behind. So my talk is entitled, it's the story of Rabbi Jacob Joseph. It's a social experiment that we know unfortunately failed. And we're going to talk about it, I'm going to be critical of it. It's my job to be a critic. I'm the speaker, I can be the critic. But it was a noble attempt that failed. So we're going to begin in the last 3 decades of the 19th century. A major debate raged in Eastern Europe. The question that the subject of the debate was New York or the United States the golden of Medina, or was it the trade from Medina? If there are terms that I'm using and people don't understand, please stop. In general, the Eastern European rabbis said that the United States and New York was the trade from Medina. It was hard to be a frum Jew here. It really was hard. The rabbis also preached against people emigrating for some self-interesting purposes, because if their congregants would get up and come to the United States, they have no more congregation, they have no more kihlah. So, the question is, who won this debate? Was it a golden Medina or a trade from Medina? You know the answers, right? Okay, very good. But I think if we have to pick one, and you can argue this, it's not fact, but almost 2 million Jews came here from Eastern Europe in a period of 35 years. So on a temporary basis, parts of it were trade, absolutely yes, but I think overall it was the golden Medina. Okay, so the situation in 1875 in New York City was a disaster. One rabbi ruled that butcher A's meat was treif. The next rabbi said it's kosher. There was no yeshiva katana, no yeshiva gedola on the Lower East Side in 1879. The only resources people had, they had malamdim to teach their kids. And most of them were very poor teachers. They didn't engage the kids didn't learn anything, and some of the kids just wanted to be in public school. There was another machloket on the Lower East Side. Does the Lower East Side have a natural eruv, or does it not? And on Shabbat, some people would be walking and carrying things, and some people did not. So it was a balagan. There was no uniformity. There was no cohesion there. So a group of Orthodox Jews on the Lower East Side, from about 25 or 30 different shuls, got together, and we're talking now not about rabbis, we're talking about lay leadership. Just, regular members of the shuls, and they thought if they could unite and pool their financial resources, and they wanted to import a major European rabbi who was both a scholar and a well-respected leader, they thought they could potentially save orthodoxy for the next generation. Piece of cake? Not so simple. So our subject today is the lay leadership of the Orthodox community on the Lower East Side, starting in about 1879 and going to 1902. All right, we're going to do a little reading. I'm going to try and cut down on this because we're a little bit late. If you turn to page, let's see, I think it's the next to the last page. They're not numbered. It says, there's 1879 on the 3rd line. Does everybody have that? It says a call to Israel. Yes. 1879.
Bill circulated among our floors.
Yeah, right. Okay, so would anybody volunteer to read?
Third to the last.
Will anybody volunteer to read for me?
I'll read.
Okay, just skip paragraph 4. Do 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7.
The present condition of American Judaism demands the earnest attention and serious consideration of those who are desirous of perpetuating the ancient faith and transmitting intact to their children that priceless inheritance, to maintain which our forefathers freely surrendered their lives and their fortunes. While our material prosperity has been increased to a marvelous extent, while we are enjoying all the blessings which civil and religious liberty can bestow, the disintegrating process in our religious system is gradually but surely going on, and the position of affairs is appalling appalling beyond description.
Excuse me for 1 second, let me
Which am I
interrupt.
skipping?
You're skipping 4.
Okay.
But, I mean, here's the conflict, the Mahloket in Eastern Europe. They're saying we have a golden Medina here, but it's also a tray from Medina, and they're stating the problem. This is the problem they want to deal with. Go on to paragraph 3 and skip 4.
Okay. The open and flagrant desecration of the Sabbath, the neglect of dietary laws and regulations, the formation of all the various shades and degrees of orthodoxy and reform are signs of the times to which we can no longer be blind, and which all the glare and glamour of costly synagogues and temples cannot conceal from our view. In order to accomplish anything, we must be united, for in union there is strength. We must have a leader whose character will inspire respect, whose abilities will impart confidence, and whose erudition and reputation will silence all disaffection and end all cavil and dispute. We believe that such a leader can be found in the eminent Rabbi Dr. Meir L. Malbim, who possesses all the qualifications for the position, and arrangements are now in progress to have him assume control of our spiritual affairs. 24 congregations and a number of good men earnest in the cause have already signified their willingness to aid us in bringing about the desired results, and we have the promise that 25 congregations more will cooperate with us. All that we ask at present is your moral support and aid in the agitation of the measure, and your personal effort at the meeting of your congregation to obtain the adoption of such resolutions as will enable our efforts to be crowned with success.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, the question is, why? First of all, Rabbi Malbim did not have a doctor in front of his name. He's not ABD either. He didn't go to public university. He was not an MD. They put that there, with no basis for it, whatever that's worth. So the question is, why would Rabbi Meir Malbim want to come to the United States? What does he know about the United States? So let's look at his CV. He was 70 years old, but he was a major, major scholar. And his problem was he was constantly at war with the Maskilim. You know what the Maskilim were? Maskilim were the enlightened Jews of Eastern Europe who wanted standard Orthodox Jews to learn the local language. They wanted them to learn secular studies. They wanted them to learn the Hebrew language and other things besides Stam Gemara.
Excuse me. That means that's no different what they were doing there than they're doing in the United States.
As far as what?
And you said he was opposed to this?
Yes, he was opposed to that.
And what was the group that he was opposed to?
He was opposed to the Maskilim, the enlightened.
Which the enlightened group. And the people in the United States are, and the people that say the people in the United States are the enlightened group also.
So there is a good parallel. It's a very good point.
So why would they bring somebody like him in who's going to fight with them?
Okay.
So let's listen.
Okay, no. It's a very good point. I'm going to try and explain. The fact of the matter is his CV, his credentials weren't examined critically. And you'll see this as we evolve through other possible rabbis. So the CV goes as follows. He had made these enemies of the Maskilim, and as the result of this, he was imprisoned in Bucharest, expelled from Romania, he was ordered out of Mogilev, and forced to leave Königsberg. That's not a very impressive CV. I mean, he was in trouble. He had serious enemies. So, you think he was really interested in coming to New York? No. He wanted to get away from his enemies. He had been in trouble. So, how did it turn out? They sent him a letter saying, you've been hired for this job. They made this announcement in the newspaper. But snail mail is slow nowadays. You know how it was sending mail across the ocean? It took a lot longer. So they sent him this letter, and while the letter was being transported across the ocean, he received another offer. And he received an offer to serve a community. I should have looked up where this is, Kremenchug. Anybody ever hear of Kremenchug? I don't know where it is either. And he accepted the offer. So look at this. New York got turned down for Kremenchug. Could you believe that? That's terrible. But it gets even worse than that. And this part isn't funny. It's unfortunate, but on the way to Kremenchug, Rabbi Malbim got ill and passed away. So this New York group now has one strike against it. They tried to get this rabbi, and it didn't work out. There are two quotes I'm going to read here from some newspapers about the reviews when they heard this call for Israel, what these people think about it. There's the Jewish Record in Philadelphia. It's a newspaper whose biases I don't really know, but they said, Reverend Malbin is over 70 years of age, and it appears to us that no matter how learned or distinguished a rabbi he may be, it would be folly to select a man of his age, ignorant of the language and customs of this country, to fill so responsible a position. Surely some learned English-speaking rabbi in the prime of life might be secured. So the critique was very, very valid. He doesn't know anything about the United States. He was running away from his problems. He doesn't speak English. How's he going to save orthodoxy for the next generation? And then we have Isaac Mayer Wise. Isaac Mayer Wise was the head of the Reform movement in the United States at the time, and he's a nasty critic. So he writes, as a man of rabbinical learning, Rabbi Malbim is highly respectable, but he appears not to have the slightest idea of the wants and demands of this age. And he was right. And he predicts he would be played out in New York 4 weeks after his arrival, because he could not do anything very useful and startling for his congregation. So it didn't work out. It took the community 8 years till they recovered from this and were ready to try all over again. During those 8 years, I'm sure there were several 100,000 Jews who had now come to the Lower East Side. This time, they only had about 20 Orthodox congregations, but they had 4 well-to-do businessmen, and they collected $2,500 to secure a famous Eastern European rabbi. They didn't realize that the model was flawed. They were trying to do the same thing, just get somebody better. Okay, and this is what they did. The secretary of this new association was instructed to write to 8 of the leading Eastern European rabbis, asking them for their recommendation for a rabbi for a job. Different approach. Rather than selecting somebody, they're asking the Gedolei Hador, the most famous rabbis in Eastern Europe, who they would recommend. But their hope was that one of the rabbis would offer themselves as a candidate. That's not the way to do things. Either you say to them, this job is available, or give me recommendations. You can't have it both ways. So they wrote to, let's see, we have the rabbis down here somewhere. The fourth to the last page. On the top it says Chief Rabbi.
Yeah.
Okay, the right-hand column, it says The Search, 1887.
The search now.
Right, okay, the last paragraph, I'll read it, it's very quick. They asked for their recommendations. These are the rabbis they wrote to. Rabbi Isaac Elchanan, Spector of Kovno. As they say, this was Gadol Hador. This was the most famous, most illustrious rabbi in Eastern Europe. They also wrote to Rabbi Hillel Lifshitz of Suwalki, and you'll see he's one of the candidates. They wrote to Elijah Chaim Meisels of Lutz. He was a candidate, and sure enough, Rabbi Jacob Joseph's name comes up, and he's ultimately the winner of this marathon. There's Rabbi Azriel Hildesheimer of Berlin. He was a little bit to the left of this group. I don't know how he got in there, but he's certainly a Talmid Chacham and a very righteous person. Rabbi Joseph Duber-Diskin of Brest-Litovsk, I don't know anything about him. Rabbi Chaim Berlin of Moscow was a very famous rabbi. So they wrote to these rabbis, and naturally it took a long time again. There's a letter going across and a letter coming back. So the rabbis wrote back, and their answers were really mostly parod, because it wasn't specified clearly what they wanted. And very often their letters coming back asked more questions than they answered. And one of the questions they asked, which is an interesting one, is they asked whether this position of chief rabbi would be recognized by the government as an official permanent position. Why did they ask this question? First of all, they had no idea what they were being offered. But second of all, there was a model in England, the chief rabbi of the British Empire. This model existed at that time. I think Rabbi Joseph Hertz was the chief rabbi around the turn of the century. So, 2 leading candidates emerged. There were 2 groups. There was the scholarly group, and again, these are laymen looking for a rabbi. There was a scholarly group and the businessman group. The businessman group was certainly scholarly also, but the business group wanted a scholarly chief rabbi be accepted not only by the local Jewish community, but by the larger Jewish community and the non-Jewish world. And their candidate was Rabbi Hillel Lifshitz of Suwalki. He was a noted Talmudic scholar with a wide knowledge of general culture and a good command of the German language. Does the German language matter? Efes, nothing, doesn't matter. And a letter was sent out on September 18th stating that he was the ideal candidate. And again, we're schlepping across the ocean and waiting for the schlep back. In the meantime, this committee wasn't working so well together. There was a second group, that the scholarly element, who felt differently. And they lobbied for a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Spector. He was the son of the Gadol Hador, the son of Isaac Yochanan Spector. And even though he was very young, which was a debit on his part, he was generally very well thought of. He'd actually undertaken a mission to St. Petersburg to lobby for something in the Tsarist government. So the scholarly element decided they wanted him, and a letter was sent out. So now you have letters going to two candidates, and what's going to happen? You're going to have a disaster. So what happened was, Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Spector, the chief rabbi, his secretary started a lobbying effort to try and get the job for his son, Tzvi Hirsch. Now, we don't know what Rabbi Spector said and what his role in it is, but his secretary was another rabbi, and I'm sure he didn't undertake this mission on his own. He decided, the rabbi's secretary decided, he's going to lobby for the rabbi's son to get this job. You know, it's an inside job, an inside coup. And he wrote to many of the leading Eastern European rabbis, a lot of whom were the same rabbis that got letters asking for suggestions, lobbying for Tzvi Hirsch to be the chief rabbi in the United States. And soon, the leaders of this association in the United States realized that Rabbi Spector's secretary was trying to engineer a coup here. This wasn't going, they were not making the choice. There was a lobby effort in Eastern Europe. But they also found out that Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch had not presented his CV correctly. They found 3 skeletons in his closet. One, this is the son of the Gadol Hador in Eastern Europe, and they found out he changed his name from his father's name, Spector. His family name was now Rabinowitz. Why do you do that? Because there are skeletons in the closet. Second thing they found out, he had suffered from some business reversals, and he couldn't pay his creditors. Why do you think he was coming here? You figure it out. And third, his wife was recently declared insane, and he had separated from her in a manner that left wide room for criticism in the rabbinic world. So they were not going to accept this guy. So now, what had happened is they turned down their 2 leading candidates. They turned down this Rabbi Lifshitz, and they turned down Isaac Elchanan Spector's son. So they're in a pickle now. This is probably 9 months into this with the letters back and forth. So there are 2 candidates left, Rabbi Elijah Meisels of Lutz and Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Vilna. So the association offers the job to Rabbi Meisels. And he replied slowly, with some interest, some suspicions, some apprehension. He suggested a meeting with 2 members of the association in Hamburg. Hamburg was the main port, or one of the main ports, where people came from Eastern Europe to the United States. And he also mentioned that he would endorse the candidacy of Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch. This is the guy, he's endorsing it, they're asking him to take the job, and he's endorsing somebody else. It's a mess. So clearly, this one didn't work out either. So now they've rejected 3 candidates. And who's left? Not their first choice, Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Vilna. So in the fall of 1887, this is, I think, almost a year since they started the process, they still had nobody. So they offer Rabbi Jacob Joseph a job. Erev Sukkot, they send out a letter offering him the job, and within a month, which is record time, he replies in the affirmative. But now the transatlantic negotiations begin. This is not so simple. We're not going to go through all the details about this, but they were resolved by late December, 2 months later. And Rabbi Jacob Joseph, I may even call him RJJ, I don't mean to slight him. He was a tzaddik. He was a good soul, and he got stuck in this thing. He didn't realize what he was getting into. So what happened is he didn't ask for a specific salary. He's a humble guy. He's not asking for thousands and thousands of dollars. He asked that his salary be appropriate for his position. That's reasonable. You guys decide, I'll accept it. And a salary of $2,500 was agreed upon. He asked for a 6-year contract. It's reasonable. He's pulling up his roots in Eastern Europe. He's coming here. The association agreed to pay for his apartment and to furnish it and to pay his travel expenses. That's standard items in a contract nowadays. However, things are never simple. There was one sticking point. Rabbi Jacob Joseph asked for substantial advance before he could leave Vilna. Now, guess why? The why was, again, he was heavily in debt, and his creditors wouldn't allow him to leave Vilna until he settled his scores. So you can see disaster coming now. The association was furious. They had worked for over a year to get a rabbi, and now this guy wants money up front. And they were afraid. If you go to the public and ask for more money, they're going to say, why? Are we going to tell them that this rabbi is in debt? We can't tell them that. And they didn't know what to do. And then if they say no to him, they've wasted over a year. They have nothing to show for it. So they're in a pickle. And sure enough, word leaked out that Rabbi Jacob Joseph was in debt. And they decided to go ahead anyway. And they solicited additional funds. But a dear friend, Isaac Mayer Wise, the head of the Reform Movement, in his newspaper, he said, and I quote, "Is it possible that the holy man like Holy Russia has debts? I give it up." That's what he said. Any opportunity he had to stick it to the Orthodox, he did. This is Isaac Mayer Wise. So they had the fundraiser, they raised the funds, and they sent him the money with a note saying, please come as soon as possible. All right, this actually happened in March of 1888. You know what monumental event occurred in March of 1888 in New York? None of us were around then. The blizzard. The day after they agreed to this, the blizzard occurred. So the letter didn't go out right away. Nothing went easily. But anyway, he agreed to come. They wrote up a constitution. And yeah, we should look at this for a second. On the 4th page, it says Chief Rabbi in the upper right-hand corner. Okay. Everybody have it? I'm going to read just a couple of them very briefly. It says only delegates, I'm going to read 2, 3, 4, and 8, I think. Only delegates of the congregation shall be entitled to vote for the election of the chief rabbi. That's fair. The chief rabbi shall appoint dayanim with the consent of the board of trustees. Why shouldn't a rabbi choose his own dayanim? He's not in charge. The board of trustees are in charge. The chief rabbi shall not give authoritative qualifications, smicha, to any person to render religious decisions, nor shall he issue religious licenses, hechsherim, to anybody without the consent of the trustees. He's under their thumb. He cannot do anything without their permission. Last one, the rabbi, this is real important. The rabbi shall not accept any fees for haskamot, that was said earlier, and kashrut. The board of trustees may levy a fee for such purposes which shall go to the funds of the association. Okay, so I'm going to digress for a moment. I'm going to talk a little bit about his Beit Din. There were 2 members of the Beit Din who were of historical interest. Okay, look at the front cover. There's a picture of Rabbi Jacob Joseph on your left, and look at the rabbi on the right. Some of the pictures of him are a little bit too dark, and it says Harav HaGaon, Rabbi Naftali Reiter. And look at him, he's holding a sefer, he's sitting, if you look carefully, in a fancy chair. He has a really long beard, stately, elegant, good-looking guy, right? You know why? He was my great-great-grandfather. That's why. So I have a vested interest in this story. He was my great-great-grandfather, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha. And his claim to fame, one of his claims to fame, was being on the Beit Din of Rabbi Jacob Joseph. Second claim to fame, he had a shul called Magen Avraham on the Lower East Side. Third claim, which is really his most substantial claim, was he founded what was called the Downtown Talmud Torah on the Lower East Side. He founded it, I think, in the 1890s, and it lasted well into the 1950s. At his levaya, at his funeral, he had 1,500 of his students accompanying the levaya to the cemetery. So,
Why didn't they make him chief rabbi?
they wanted, okay, this is an experiment. They're bringing Europe to the Lower East Side. The Lower East Side isn't working. They're bringing Europe here. Okay, so we go on from there. The other dialogue that was important, which I think was very interesting, is Rabbi Israel Kaplan. His claim to fame is that he was not a relative of mine. Okay, this is, he was decidedly more liberal than most of the rabbis in the Beit Din. He was more liberal than my great-great-grandfather, than Rabbi Jacob Joseph. And there are two examples. While still in Europe, Rabbi Israel Kaplan sent his daughter Sophie to attend the Cheder. Sounds like, you know, the movie. And his argument was, and basically it was accepted, if she doesn't go to Cheder with the boys, she's not going to learn Hebrew and she's not going to learn Torah. And this was accepted in the community where he was. Second evidence of his liberalism was he took his son out of Yeshivat Eitz Chaim. When we started this talk in 1879, there was no yeshiva. They did found a yeshiva called Yeshivat Eitz Chaim, and Rabbi Kaplan sent his son there, but then he took him out. Now, for instance, my great-great-grandfather sent his sons, his two oldest sons, to Yeshivat Eitz Chaim, because that's the only place to go. However, Yeshivat Eitz Chaim at 6 o'clock at night started Limudei Chol, secular studies. My great-great-grandfather would not allow his two sons to go there, so he took them out at 6 o'clock at night. So, there's an expression like father, like son. Guess who Rabbi Israel Kaplan's son was? Anybody know? Mordechai Kaplan, yes. Who turned out to be much more liberal than even his father. Very good. Kol hakavod. Okay, so let's get back to Rabbi Jacob Joseph. I gave my father's family honor. My father's brother was named Naphtali after Rabbi Naphtali Reiter. Okay, so RJJ arrived in New York in the summer of 1888 to great acclaim. I mean, people were waiting and waiting and waiting. You know, they sent him this notice in March, right before the blizzard of '88. He shows up in the summer. He ends up in New Jersey. Somehow that's where the boat docks. Naturally, the boat comes in on Shabbat, so he can't get off the boat on Shabbat. But ultimately, he got back to the Lower East Side. They gave him some peace and quiet and a chance to acclimate. And 3 weeks later, he gave his introductory sermon. What language do you think he gave it in? Yiddish. Whoever said German is right. The people on the Lower East Side speak German? No, they spoke Yiddish. So he gave it, that's not quite the same thing. So on a Shabbat in the summer of 1888, at the largest shul on the Lower East Side, standing room only, windows open, people standing outside, over 1,000 people come to hear him. And what I didn't mention his CV, actually, which is important. Rabbi Jacob Joseph's CV. He came from Vilna. That's one of the pinnacles of learning, places of learning in Eastern Europe. Rabbi Jacob Joseph was not the Rosh Yeshiva. He was not the chief rabbi. He wasn't the Av Beit Din. He was a Magid. He was a preacher. And he was really good because he really impressed the people with his first sermon.
Why did he give it in German? I mean, he knew the exam.
I don't know.
You didn't know English?
So who understood it?
He didn't know English. He knew Yiddish for sure.
We are not
Yeah.
I mean, again, part of the appeal was to appeal to what's called the uptown Jews. The downtown Jews were the poor Jews from Eastern Europe. Uptown were the German Jews, and they were wealthy. So let me read you some reviews. Actually, the only one I have here is, I don't know if you know who Felix Adler was. Felix Adler was the son of a Reform rabbi who took one step further to the left. He left Judaism. He became the founder of the Ethical Culture Society, which still exists in New York. So he writes a review of Rabbi Jacob Joseph, and you just expect him to destroy him. But listen to this review. Rabbi Jacob Joseph is a conundrum. His orthodoxy is genuine sincere. He came from the very hotbed of Jewish learning and piety, and yet he makes the impression of a broadly tolerant and liberal-minded gentleman. That's a pretty good review. And he goes on, I have read the address with interest and profound satisfaction. If such is to be the tenor of the new rabbi's teaching, we must all, no matter what our opinions, welcome his advent to this country and congratulate the congregations over which he presides upon the admirable choice they have made. So getting this from the far left wing, who's not even Jewish anymore, is a wonderful review. This must have been quite a sermon, but unfortunately I wasn't there. Okay.
Were the town Germans came downtown to hear?
Some of them did. A lot of them were not Shomer Shabbat. We're talking about Louis Marshall and I can't remember some of the other folks. These weren't religious Jews, they were Reform Jews, and they would travel, for sure.
But
Okay.
the people that showed up did not understand it. Most of them.
I'm sure some of them did, and some of them didn't. I mean, this was a happening. This is a happening. People wanted to be there.
Someone who knows Yiddish should be able to have a...
Well, the question is, how well would they really understand it? Don't know. Okay, so let's get back. He has a job to do now. He impressed everybody with his initial sermon, and now let's get to Tachlis. His purpose, in theory, was to preserve orthodoxy for the next generation. In practice, his job was kashrut, because kashrut was a balagan, as they say. Okay, so the status of kashrut in 1888, fist fights were common all the time. There was total disregard of halakha and Board of Health regulations. Competitors were malshinim, they told stories about each other. It was just a disaster, and he was supposed to fix this. And this is where the conflict between Rabbi Jacob Joseph and his association began. The Board of Trustees, in its constitution, spoke about kashrut. We read about it. And they said they're going to tax the meat so they can raise money to pay his salary and to pay their expenses. To his credit, and again, this is the beginning of the decline of Rabbi Jacob Joseph. He's in the country less than 2 months, and here comes his downfall. He was opposed to levying any taxes on supervision of kashrut. He was not a businessman. He didn't have to run this thing. He had his salary. He had his upfront money, but he was opposed to this. And the board said, no way, we need money. So he extracted one concession from him. Now, I'm not sure this makes sense, but this is what's written. It was generally believed in those days, and none of us were there to testify about it, that poultry was the staple of the rich, and meat was the staple of the poor. I don't know if that's true or not. So as a consequence, they decided to levy a 1 cent tax on each chicken that was sold, and not to tax the meat. This is the concession that he extracted from the Board of Trustees. So a plumber was placed on each and every chicken, signifying the hashgacha of the rabbi. I think we have something about that. Yeah, last page, last paragraph. My voice is leaving me. I need somebody to read the last paragraph. Announcement from the chief rabbi. Anybody read? Again? Yeah, good reader. Yes, he is.
Herewith I make known to all our brethren, the children of Israel, who tremble at the word of the Lord, that inspectors have already been appointed in the poultry slaughterhouses to test the knives and to have supervision of everything in their care. From this day forward, every bird slaughtered in the abattoir under our supervision will be stamped with a plumber. I remember, I could never get those off the chicken. On the plumber will be the words, Harav HaKolel, Harav Yaakov Yosef, and we make it known to you that if we find any butcher's chicken not so stamped, that it was not killed under our supervision, and we cannot guarantee it to be kosher. May those who hearken to our words prosper and share in the heavenly blessing on the 3rd day of the Sidra HaBracha, 5649, September 18th, 1888.
Thank you. Okay, so they're in business now. They're putting plumbers on chickens, and what happened now is all hell literally broke loose on the Lower East Side. There were major protest meetings. People were real upset by this. There were 3 groups of people who protested. One is the house nuns. They didn't want to pay the 1 penny. You know, 1 penny in those days it's not 1 penny in our days.
Yeah.
It's a significant amount of money. So the housewives were really upset. The butchers were furious. Now they had to be subservient to this association. They didn't sign on to this, but their arms were being twisted to being, accepting this hashgacha. And also, this was a terrible thing. Other Orthodox rabbis deeply resented the loss of income from this new scenario. And the problem was, one of the mistakes is this was a lay-led movement. The rabbis were not consulted at any stage here. They just washed him out of the scene. They went to Eastern Europe, get a rabbi, don't talk to the other rabbis about inviting him, nothing. They were upset. This little monopoly here was upsetting everybody else on the Lower East Side. The only happy folks, there was one group of happy folks, which is really wonderful. I don't mean to make fun, but the radical press had a field day. They loved this opportunity. There's a word in Russian called korobka. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. Korobka became the battle cry. Korobka was the tax imposed by the Russian government on kosher meat. If you wanted kosher food in Russia, you had to pay this korobka tax. So the government collected it, and then they used it for whatever they wanted, including anti-Jewish measures. So people thought that this tax on the chicken was a korobka. And korobka represented everything evil in Tsarist Russia. So they felt the chief rabbi's poultry tax was a korobka. So there was one guy by the name of Professor Getzel Selikovich, who edited a radical newspaper, and he just had a wonderful time with it. And he had a great sense of humor. He was creative. So in an imitation of the association's call for the Orthodox congregations to join, he wrote in his newspaper. He made a call. It was announced that the United Chinese Orthodox Laundries were importing the town preacher from Peking, and the association would levy taxes on laundry goods, just as the Board of Ritual Slaughter imposed the tax on Orthodox chickens. Pretty cute. Upon which they hung lead medals. And then he wrote a poem. This poem is here, and it's very cute. On the lower left-hand corner of page 4, it says korobka. Very short poem.
Third to the left.
Okay? I'll read it, it's very brief. Entitled Korobka, it's by Professor Getzel Selikovich. Dance, merry Orthodox chickens, make merry, have no fear, for the rabbi of order has issued. Shiny lead medals you'll wear. You'll wear them after your slaughter, that the chief rabbi may live. They flay the skin off the worker, a fat salary, the great one to give. So it's very cute, but it's also monumentally sad. Here's this rabbi who comes from Eastern Europe with all good intentions, who's not in control of his own destiny, and he's getting lambasted. There's a lot of radicals on the Lower East Side who love stuff like this. I don't know if you ever heard about it, and I don't want to get lost, but there were things called Yom Kippur balls. There were radical Yom Kippur balls. There would be parties and events on Yom Kippur to put it in people's face that we don't do this, we don't accept this. So there was a very radical element on the Lower East Side. Okay. All right, so where are we again? Okay, so Rabbi Jacob Joseph suffered seriously. 5 days afterwards, a protest meeting was called in opposition to this korobka. In attendance were butchers who opposed Rabbi Jacob Joseph's supervision, rabbis who were envious of Rabbi Jacob Joseph's salary, and an assortment of malcontents. And this radical element was a bunch of malcontents. So the Hebrew Kosher Butchers Association was formed, and a Beit Din Tzedek was formed by 3 rabbis who were present at this protest meeting. This was a spontaneous Beit Din being formed. It doesn't generally happen that way. One of whom was a scholarly rabbi by the name of Rabbi Joshua Siegel, who was known as the Sherpser Rav. And they declared, I mean, it tells you how serious and how angry these people were. This Beit Din declared that all the meat sold by butchers under the supervision of Rabbi Jacob Joseph was trade. I mean, this is war. They're fighting a war. They absolutely are. The association now was reeling. They're in big trouble. They made a very, very bad mistake. And they realized it to their credit. And what they did is they rescinded this fee for the plumber. And they transferred it, rather than from the consumers, they got it now from the butchers. The butchers had to pay, or what they have to pay, $5.50 for a sign and for kosher supervision. And the defensive strategy worked. Within 5 months, 86 butchers had signed up. So now they're rolling all over again, but they still need money. Money is their big problem. So they made another announcement. They invited flour merchants who were planning to sell flour for the baking of matzot to submit to the supervision of Rabbi Jacob Joseph for the approval and the certificate from the rabbi of $1 per barrel of flour. And I guess they didn't know the saying that history repeats itself, and all of a sudden a balagan all over again. People deeply resented this. So, in another effort at damage control, which wasn't so successful, Rabbi Jacob Joseph invited the Shurp Sarab to serve on his Beit Din with my great-grandfather. So the Shurp Sarab said, He said, I was in the United States before you were. I got here in 1875, you come in 1888. If I go on your Beit Din, I'm subservient to you. No way, because he also had his own plan. So, a couple of weeks later, Rabbi Siegel became New York's second chief rabbi. The title of the presentation is When New York Had 3 chief rabbis. So now we have 2 chief rabbis, Rabbi Jacob Joseph and the Shurp Sarab. And he became chief rabbi of the congregations of Israel, men of Poland and Austria. And he had 20 congregations. It turns out that this new Beit Din is of Glitziana Jews. The new group is Glitzianas. The first group was Litvaks. And it turns out also that most of the butchers on the Lower East Side were Glitzianas. So it was a good shidduch. You had a Beit Din, you had a Glitziana chief rabbi, and most of the butchers were Glitzianas. So World War III started again. And it was, again, down and dirty. The Kosher Butchers Association printed an announcement that said they had found plumbers of the chief rabbi on choked and putrid chickens. I mean, they're playing dirty. This is serious stuff. And to their credit, the new chief rabbi and his Beit Din didn't sign on the announcement, but neither did they say you shouldn't print this. So there are 2 Beit Dins, 2 chief rabbis, and now we come to my favorite part of the story. This is the 3rd chief rabbi. And this is a story that was printed a couple of years later. This is 1893. We started in 1888 when Rabbi Jacob Joseph came, and now we're in 1893. And the rabbi's name is Rabbi Chaim Jacob Vidwowitz, and he came to New York from Moscow. And he gathered a couple of Hasidic shtivlach together under his control, and he hung out a shingle stating, Chief Rabbi of America. And when asked by a reporter, who made you chief rabbi, he replied with a twinkle in his eye, the sign painter. It goes on, it gets better. And why chief rabbi of America? He answered with a chuckle, because it would be impossible for all of America to gather together to depose me. I mean, it's a precious, precious story. And it's true. This is what this guy did. So New York now had 3 chief rabbis. Okay, we're going to get back to Rabbi Joseph, and we're going to try and start finishing up. What time is it? How we fix the time? Okay. All right. So Rabbi Jacob Joseph had a 6-year contract. The 3rd chief rabbi came 5 years into his contract, but after the disaster with the flour and with the kosher shechita, he was a non-entity. Nobody listened to him. The association had financial problems, so he got to his 6th year, and a very kind man by the name of Henry Chuck, who was one of the founders of the association, renewed his contract for 1 more year. So he goes into 1875 or 4, something like that, and then he's neglected and forgotten. Nobody talks to him, nobody comes to visit him, he's neglected, nobody cares anymore. A year later, after his contract ran out, he suffered a stroke, a very debilitating stroke, from which he never completely recovered. And then in 1902, unfortunately, he died. He'd been here 14 years, and when he died, things turned from worse to even worse. There was nothing good that happened to this poor, kind man after he came here. In 1902, all of a sudden, the Lower East Side wakes up. Gadol Hador, by Jacob, Joseph has died, we must honor him. So the first thing that happened is all the congregations that were members of this association wanted him buried in their plot. And they started a bidding war for the privilege of burying him in their plot. I mean, it's a chilul Hashem, it really was. You forget the guy, and all of a sudden when he dies, he becomes important. The only good thing that came out of this bidding war is they raised $1,500 for his poor wife for the privilege of burying her husband in the cemetery. And in addition, they promised her $15 per month for the rest of her life. So that was nice.
He started yeshiva, huh?
What?
Started yeshiva.
Yeshiva was later. Okay.
Where's he buried?
Okay, we'll get to it. Okay, actually, you might as well look. It's in your handout. He's in Union Field Cemetery. Right where you live. Queens is the burial place of plenty important Jews. It's an unusual shape. I don't know why they did it this way. But that's the burial plot in Union Field Cemetery.
Where is that?
It's on the border of Queens and Brooklyn.
What's the name of the cemetery?
Union Field Cemetery.
This Springfield Cemetery.
My great-great-grandfather, Rav Naftali Ryder, is buried there also, not far away. Okay, so what happens now? So he died, and a funeral has to be arranged. And again, as I said before, nothing went well. To take a funeral through the Lower East Side, you need police permits, because you stop in Shul A, Shul B, Shul D. All these shuls who had forgotten about him, all of a sudden wanted to stop in front of their shul. So they got the police permit, and the police planned to send out, I think it was 20 or 25 policemen. A member of the Jewish community realized that night there were going to be a ton of people there. Businesses were closed the next day. People wanted to honor him. So he called the police precinct, the local police precinct, and said, we're going to need more policemen there. Somehow the message didn't get passed on to the head of the precinct. Anyway, the funeral procession started out fine. There were about 50 to 100,000 people there. There were 200 carriages that followed in the Levaya. And things went well. They stopped at all these shuls, and they're heading to Grand Street, to the ferry Grand Street, taking them across the East River for burial on the Brooklyn-Queens border. And as they're turning onto Grand Street, there's yelling and screaming. There's a factory on Grand Street called the Ho Company Printing Company. A very famous factory. This was the big printing place on the Lower East Side. They had more than 1,800 people working in this factory. A minute fraction of them were Jewish. They were predominantly German. And as they rounded the corner, and they came onto the street, people in the factory started throwing things at the Levaya. It was a terrible disgrace. They threw rocks, they threw metal, they threw wood, and they were disrupting. This was an unprovoked attack. Turns out that they had done similar things before, but that wasn't really talked about very much. So the people in the Levaya started throwing things back. They're not going to just sit there and be pelted. They threw things back. And then a bunch of them rushed the front of the factory. The factory workers came out with a hose and hosed them down. Supposedly, one account in one of the newspapers said there were 4 policemen standing in front of the factory who did nothing. I don't know whether that's true or not. It wouldn't surprise me. So all of a sudden, there's a big balagan. There's a riot going on, a full-fledged riot. People throwing things both ways, and there's supposed to be a funeral procession going on. So the head of the Ho Company calls the local precinct and says, we have a riot going on here. He claimed that his building was attacked. So the police come down, 6 paddy wagons, 200 policemen, and let's see if I have the description here. Yeah, okay. And they're led by this guy, Inspector Cross. And the Times reports a couple of quotes that are interesting. This is a quote from the Times. It is evident from the actions of the officers that they considered the mourners in the wrong. So they were called by the factory owners, they're coming down and they're attacking the mourners. And the quote attributed to Inspector Cross was, kill those sheenies, club them right and left, get them out of the way. So 200 police come down with police clubs, and they're beating you-know-what out of the Jews who were not armed, and Within half an hour, the riot was quelled. 11 Jews were arrested. 200 Jews needed medical attention. It was a mess. It was a disaster. So they took them to the local precinct. 9 of the 11, even though they argued that they were victims, and the lawyers argued they were victims, they were fined $5 to $10 each, which is not an insubstantial amount of money, and released. 2 Jews were held for $1,000 bail for inciting to riot. Give me a break. And 200 people were treated by doctors. More than 200 windows in the factory were broken. This is by Jews throwing things back. So they certainly did not sit there passively. They tried, but they lost. They were outnumbered. The rest of the funeral from there, thank God, went very, very nicely. Actually, I don't have time for it now. There's a major investigation into how the police behave. You know, police corruption now, police corruption then, police brutality then, police brutality now. The mayor hired a blue ribbon panel to investigate this. Their report is here. We don't really have time for it now, but there is one postscript that I'd like to close with. Just about 2 years after the funeral, there's an item in the newspaper called the General Slocum Steamboat Fire. On June 15, 1904, more than 1,300 members of New York City's Kleine Deutschland, Little Germany Association, which included predominantly most of the members of the Hoe Company factory, boarded a boat called the General Slocum Steamboat to spend the day at the beach in Locust Grove on Long Island. As the steamboat motored uptown up the East River, as it passed 90th Street, suddenly it became engulfed in a ball of fire. More than 1,000 people died before the boat could finally be docked. So the question that is posed, and this I close with, was this an accident that just happened, or was this some sort of retribution what happened on the Lower East Side? You guys be the judge, you be the jury. I am done. Any questions? Questions?
You talk about the Lower East Side. The Lower East Side is about a 30-block area with 24 synagogues. What were they worried about the Orthodox?
About what?
Why were they worried about Orthodoxy?
Okay, there was no uniformity about Kashrut. There was no uniformity about Abram. There was no place to teach the kids. They had to do something.
But you go up to Muncie, you see that same thing going on.
And Muncie's a different story. Muncie's a different story. Muncie's a much larger area, a much wealthier area. This was a very poor area. Very, very poor. Questions?
It just seems to me that we live in such a peaceful environment now with Ashburn and everything compared to what was.
There were 72 actually.
There are still problems with Kashrut.
Plenty of times, but this is.
There were 72 that are against each other.
Yeah, there were.
Sometimes I'll get along.
Anything else?
It's
Any
my
other
brother,
questions?
I thought it was complicated.
That gave up the idea of ever having a chief rabbi.
Yes, that was the end of it.
Did you ever try it after that? It's been just as bad.
No, I mean, they brought in, you can't transplant the European jury to the Lower East Side. You just can't do that. And they brought in elderly men, they brought in somebody who didn't speak the language. How are you going to save it for the kids? The kids may respect him, but if you can't talk to them, his other mistake was also, he was not a supporter of unions. So to be Jewish on the Lower East Side and not support the unions is a death knell.
Weren't there American rabbis? Why'd they have to go there?
That's true. That's what they said. Yes, there
They had
were.
to spend their money and everything.
They
There
were
were
longing.
American rabbis at that time.
Yes,
Because
they
that-
were longing for what they had in Europe. They were looking for the shtetl.
But those rabbis had problems too.
Okay.
Yes, of course they did. But they idealized this. It's like idealizing the shtetl. The ideal shtetl that we talk about didn't exist.
I don't think there really were American rabbis.
Oh, there were. There absolutely were.
Oh, they were plenty.
It's not on the Europeans, I think.
No, they were uptown rabbis. Rabbis for the Americanized German Jews. Yes, there were uptown Spanish and Portuguese synagogue rabbis. There were shuls on the Upper East
They
Side.
were born in America, people, or they went to Europe to get their sneaker. Like,
Overseas.
I think Rabbi Druckmann was.
Bernard Drachman, yes. He was there. He was an English-speaking Orthodox
So he
rabbi.
went to Europe to get his sneaker.
Okay, but he was American. He spoke English. Rabbi Bernard Drachman is a great example. Absolutely, yes.
There were rabbis.
Downtown Talmud Torah was very unique because the kids who went there, the families were really Orthodox, but opted for public school education, but wanted the religious education also.
How do you know that?
My husband went to Downtown Talmud Torah.
Really?
His friends and family.
That's very nice. Thank you. Thank you very
And
much.
we have a former member whose mother was the principal for a while, and he taught in Downtown.
Who was that?
Silverman, Ralph Silverman's mother.
That's great.
Rabbi Breuer's daughter, right.
Who?
Rabbi Breuer's daughter.
Very
So
nice.
that they looked at it as Orthodox, it was Orthodox, but it was a unique institution because
They
they
went to public
school.
That's great.
How about the Schneesek line? Why couldn't they do that?
Harrison was, at that time, wasn't interested in coming here.
If no more questions, I said I'm going to thank you afterwards, depending on, so I'm thanking you.
I remind the old Jews always fighting. Always fighting.
Yeah, Harrison.
My grandfather didn't get his rights.
Excuse me, bye-bye now.
Thank you very much. Does he want these back, right? I think really. Dr. Luca, you want these back, right?
That's very nice. That's a great story.
When did RJJ start?
I'd like to absolutely thank you very much. Yes.
Another piece.
When did RJJ?
Another piece.
It was after he had died. It was significantly after. I don't remember when.
We taught, my husband and I taught public school back in the back of RJJ, and the kids used to come out.
When was the yeshiva named after him?
So the third time, a kid was almost dead, and then they made him stay in the schoolyard. The yard was the size of the
What was the yeshiva named after him?
boys to run around.
That's the problem.
Thank you very much.
I know that, yes. You learn from history.
I don't want to be the fool anymore. I've had it. I don't. I know.